So, very good evening. So, my name is Dave Petty. I have the honour and the privilege to be the Vice Chancellor and President here at NTU. Very, very warm welcome to you all for this inaugural lecture by Professor Amy Twigger Holroyd. And a special welcome to Amy's husband and to her two sons, who are also in the audience this evening. Thank you for coming along. So inaugural lectures are a really important moment in the life of a university. They give us the opportunity not only to recognise the accomplishments of our colleagues as they take up a professorial role, but also to reflect on the ideas, curiosity and dedication that have shaped their academic journey. So Amy's career sits at the really fascinating intersection of fashion, design, making and sustainability. And over more than 2 decades, she's challenged us to think differently about our relationship with clothing and the systems that produce it. Before moving fully into academia, Amy spent 10 years running her experimental knitwear label, Keep and Share, creating collections that were sold nationally and internationally, and exploring how craft, design, and sustainability might coexist within fashion. Her work from this time was widely recognised and featured in publications ranging from Vogue to Fashion Theory. Amy then undertook a PhD at Birmingham City University, exploring what she describes as folk fashion, the ways in which amateur making, remaking, and re-knitting clothes might offer new insights into sustainable fashion practices. This research became the foundation for her book, Folk Fashion, Understanding Homemade Clothes, and the Reknit Revolution initiative. Following postdoctoral research at the University of Leeds, Amy joined NTU in 2016. Since then, she's made an extraordinary contribution to the intellectual life of Nottingham School of Art and Design, publishing widely, leading major research projects and networks funded by the AHRC, and helping to shape international conversations about sustainable fashion. Amy's work has explored themes ranging from participatory textile making to the cultural significance of craft practices, and more recently through her Fashion Fictions project, which has engaged more than 7,000 people across 6 continents in imagining alternative, more sustainable fashion systems. Amy's scholarship has been recognised through numerous achievements, including the publication of 5 books and most recently the award of the Philip Leverhulme Prize for Visual and Performing Arts in 2024, which recognises outstanding researchers whose work has already had a significant impact and whose future contributions are expected to be equally influential. When working, or even for leisure, Amy likes to fly as little as possible, which she says has led to quite a few adventures travelling by train and coach across Europe. In her spare time, she's also learning Aikido and is currently a blue belt, so we know we're in safe hands this evening. In tonight's lecture, Amy will reflect on the recurring patterns that have shaped her work, a refusal to accept the status quo, a willingness to dwell in the speculative, and a habit of borrowing ideas from unexpected places. Through projects ranging from her PhD research to fashion fictions, and her current research exploring alternative ways of organising fashion systems, she invites us to imagine what different futures for fashion, and perhaps for society more broadly, might look like. It promises to be a thought-provoking and really inspiring lecture. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Amy Twigger Holroyd for her inaugural lecture this evening, One Song to the Tune of Another, Alternative Possibilities for Fashion and Sustainability.
Thank you. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the kind introduction. In the blurb for this talk, I promised that I would reflect on more than 2 decades of work in the field of fashion and sustainability. Perhaps the most logical way of doing this would be chronologically, but I did that already in my associate professor inaugural lecture. Tempting just to dig out the slides and add on a few more at the end, but I thought that would be a bit of a cop-out. So I decided to organise it in a different way. I'll start by giving a bit of a timeline of the past 26 years or so. So around that time, at the beginning, I was coming to the end of my BA in fashion design with technology, including an industrial placement in a high street supplier. And I went on to do an MA, specialised in knitwear and in design for sustainability. If you want to know the significance of the sequined cap, then you have to check out my Associate Professor Inaugural on YouTube. My MA project led to me launching my slow fashion knitwear label, Keep and Share, which I ran for 10 years, and involved designing and making knitwear pieces for sale and running knitting workshops and projects in various settings. And this overlapped with my PhD research and postdoc, which developed into publications and exhibitions. I did indeed come to NTU in 2016, and alongside teaching, worked on various collaborative writing and research projects. And then the Fashion Fictions project has kept me busy since 2020. And I'm now working on projects that have developed from it. So we'll be dipping into some of these activities from different points on the timeline during what follows. And I have also worked in the odd embarrassing photograph of a younger me, as is the custom in these lectures, and the main thing I look forward to in other people. So there's a couple of those. Okay, so by means of some further introduction, I'd like to explain my use of some key terms, and I'll start with fashion. So to some people, fashion might mean like the style of dress of a particular group in society. They might think of fashion being distinguished from a broader category of clothing, which everybody wears. But that's not the way that I use this word. I work with the definition offered by the great fashion theorist Elizabeth Wilson, who, as shown in this quote, sees fashion as an all-encompassing phenomenon, and it includes everyone who's managed to get dressed today. Well done. Second key term is sustainability. I've been engaging with the idea of sustainability since, probably about 2002 or so. It seems to have gone through the status of being a buzzword and come out the other side, rejected by many as now feeling rather hollow and meaningless. And I find that this word is often now posed as being a sort of tame, business as usual approach compared with the trendy new term of regenerative. But all of this depends on how you understand the word. What does it mean? So I like to use this definition from John Ehrenfeld, which feels as relevant and challenging as ever. The possibility that humans and other life will flourish on the earth forever. And then a third key term, system. I've chosen to be the Professor of Alternative Fashion Systems. In this definition, I'm borrowing from the great Donella Meadows, author of the influential Limits to Growth report in the early 70s, and one of the founders of systems thinking. So she's explaining what a system is, this interconnected set of elements that's organised in a way that achieves something. More specifically, I'm really interested in systems of provision, so the entire set of societal arrangements through which people's needs are met, that might include kind of supply chains and business processes, but also including kind of economic, political, cultural, institutional structures, so all of the stuff that sits around that. Or more simply, who has what, how, and why. And I'm always interested in taking a systems view. So not just looking at an isolated garment or one step of the production process, for example, but I'm always wanting to set that within a wider system. And if we look at fashion systems in relation to my preferred understanding of sustainability, it's evident that there are deep problems in relation to both environmental and social issues at all stages of the life cycle, from production through to use and disposal. I'm not going to kind of flesh those out tonight, but they're the motivation for pretty much all of this work. So building on these key terms, I want to kind of straightforwardly state my approach to pursuing sustainability in the fashion context. Much work in this area is based on the notion of green growth, that is, a system that continues to be governed by the allure of continuing economic growth, but making that system as green as possible. This notion of green growth is by no means specific to fashion. It's evident in the orthodox approach to climate change, net zero, sustainability across many sectors, and government agendas more generally. So the argument is, I think, that we need growth to deliver well-being, and so this is the right path forward. But green growth is founded on the idea that economic growth can be decoupled, separated from resource use and environmental and social impacts. And the problem with this is that in-depth empirical studies show that absolute sustained decoupling has never happened, and that, unsurprisingly, it's not possible to have infinite growth on a finite planet. So I therefore align my work with post-growth thinking, is a position that accepts planetary boundaries and seeks to construct systems that work within them, which to me sounds pretty common sense. Economies that prioritise socio-ecological well-being rather than endless growth. But this would mean fundamental, significant changes to the ways that our societies, economies and systems are organised. And I've just put up here a landmark text that locates this argument within the fashion sphere. Earth Logic, written by two pioneers and people who I've worked with quite closely, who propose very simply that we need to create fashion systems that are guided by Earth Logic rather than growth logic. Okay, so having laid some groundwork, let's move on. As I explained, I've decided not to organise what I'll share with you chronologically, but rather I've chosen to identify some recurring themes, recurring patterns that I was able to identify when I was looking back at the various activities I've been involved in over the years. I have three to present to you here. So the first is a refusal to accept the status quo. I suspect my colleagues here tonight might recognise this tendency in relation to our life within the university. Maybe my family might recognise it. But it's also the way that my attitude to the massively harmful status quo of the mainstream fashion system. And you might see this come through in some of the examples of my work that I'll talk through later. But this isn't a new thing, as evidenced by Exhibit A, this beautiful item from my personal archive, an attempt to save the whale in primary school. Yes, that is how good at drawing I am. And you'll be pleased to know that if only we'd done all of the suggestions on the leaflet, all of us, then we would have sorted everything out by now, okay? Do all the things that are on my leaflets and we'll get everything sorted. That was probably the least embarrassing thing I've found in my personal archive. I've kind of curated this. Okay, let's move on to the second recurring pattern, which is a tendency to dwell in a speculative space. So this is very obviously at work in my fashion fictions project, which I'll talk about today, and the current projects that have grown from it. But again, this isn't a new thing. So here you're looking at some samples from a children's clothing library concept that I developed around 2007, 2008, with the intention of running it alongside my knitwear label. In the end, I didn't manage to get this off the ground. It was probably a bit ambitious to pull off by myself, but also a financial crash around the same time really didn't help. But even so, the story of the concept spread and gained influence. It kept getting written about as if it existed. And I was like, oh, maybe you don't have to even do the thing. You can just make the story of the thing. But certainly gave me the sense that there's value in asking what if children's clothes were distributed and owned in a different way, even if you can't go all the way to making something a reality. And then the third recurring pattern that I'd like to share is my tendency to borrow ideas from unfamiliar spheres and transpose them into a new context. So I think this is a habit that I developed as a fashion student. So reviving and recalling styles is inherently a part of fashion design practice, as shown by this quote. Fashion is always kind of drawing on its archive, its library of references, and that's what you're doing as a designer. But I think I tend to go beyond the reviving of styles or the kind of design elements, and I find myself importing ideas and concepts from beyond the fashion context and bringing it into my design. So I have a vivid memory of working on a new brief while probably a first-year fashion student at Manchester Met, trailing around the library but going far beyond the art and design area, going up the stairs into sociology and history and coming back with a towering pile of books to work with. And while I'm drawing on these ideas, concepts and theories from different spheres. I work with them in a really generative way that's captured by this quote that I only came across recently that talks about design researchers using theory as a form of malleable design material. It just really spoke to me. And it was this idea of bringing ideas into new contexts that led to the title of this lecture, One Song to the Tune of Another. So some people might have recognised that this is a game from a long-running Radio 4 comedy show. We can test who is a Radio 4 listener here to see whether this is familiar to you. So the programme is, I'm sorry, I haven't a clue. My appreciation of this show and Radio 4 more broadly dates back to my time running my knitwear label. Here I am. When I was working in my studio, often alone and with the radio on all day long. I've never been as well informed as during that period of my life. I did sometimes have a thing where I was like, I was talking to somebody about something really interesting. Who was it? And then I was like, oh no, I was just listening to the radio again. So at least now I do maybe talk to a few more people. But anyway, in the game, the panellist is challenged to sing the words of one well-known song to the tune of another well-known song, with hilarious and surprising results, perhaps making you see both songs in a new light. So, of course, we need a musical interlude. Let's listen to one example. Okay, so having got the musical interlude out of the way, let's get into the main part of the lecture. I'm going to focus on the third of the recurring patterns, where I'm not actually singing one song to the tune of another, or maybe I am sometimes, that's not the point, but I am often bringing ideas from one place and transposing them to another. So in the work that I share, you might also spot the refusal to accept the status quo and my taste for the speculative. So the first example is my work that's taken ideas of the commons and commoning and brought them into the context of fashion. So this work dates back to my time running Keep and Share and the idea that grew into my PhD research. As part of my practice, I ran a knitting tent at music festivals and various participatory knitting projects in different contexts. And I ran hand and machine knitting workshops at my studio where people would come to learn and enhance their skills. And all of these activities gave rise to many fascinating conversations about making clothes and how people feel about wearing homemade clothes. And I found that even when people had really good making skills, they often lacked confidence and had a tendency to compare what they could make with what was available in the shops. I found this, on one hand, totally understandable. I could really relate to it myself. But given my deep concerns about the social and environmental impacts of the fashion industry, I also found it pretty heartbreaking. Is as good as something from the shops really such a great thing for us to aim for? And I was suddenly struck by the idea that professionalisation and industrialisation had enclosed fashion, rendering only certain ways of participating and engaging, buying new clothes, acceptable, and others, especially making your own clothes, socially risky. So I'm borrowing here from my high school history lessons, where I learned about the enclosure of common land in England in order to force peasants into dependence on paid work, removing their rights to subsistence, the ability to live from the land. So I started to work with the idea of the fashion commons and the enclosure of the fashion commons, transposing the outrage and horror that I feel about the enclosure of land to the enclosure of fashion. And this is the book that I can remember I got from the library and being like, yes, this is it. This is what we need to do for fashion. Like a slightly crazed woman. It made sense to me. And this transposing gave me access to resistance strategies. So I was able to take inspiration from groups who've challenged enclosure, perhaps most notably the diggers of the 17th century, who, instead of obediently abiding by the laws governing access to land, occupied and cultivated an area as a way of symbolically demonstrating their view that everyone should have the freedom to dig the land and grow food. So I started asking, what would it mean to be a fashion digger? I explored the idea that it's not just about making your own clothes, but also about intervening in already existing clothes to stake your claim to them visually and materially. So I developed a technique called stitch hacking, shown as finished works here, and then in this step-by-step image you can see the process, hopefully, if it's going to work. That's not a step-by-step image, that's just a piece of knitting. No! PowerPoint's not playing nicely today, is it? Anyway, so this should be a GIF that shows you the process, which I'll now have to describe. You open up an existing piece of knitting, and you ladder a column of stitches and can reconfigure them in a new way, differently to how they were originally configured, and then close the fabric back up again. So you're retrospectively inserting a design, as I've done on both of these items. So this work developed into my PhD and then into projects that disseminated the ideas more widely, including my first book, Folk Fashion, and the Reknit Revolution project that included a solo exhibition at Rugby Art Gallery and Museum. And I'm really excited to have just loaned the work out again for exhibition at the Museum of Making in Derby for an exhibition that's opening soon. And I've since worked further with the idea of the Fashion Commons. So this is an installation that I created for We Are Commoners, an exhibition curated by Craftspace, a really fantastic organisation who I've worked with since my participatory knitting project days. The exhibition was linked to an AHRC-funded research network, Crafting the Commons, which we set up to feed into the development of the exhibition and the work commissioned for it. And this contribution of mine linked to the Fashion Fictions project, which I'll go on to in a moment. But it built on a fictional vision of a parallel world in which the commercial sale of blue clothing, only blue clothing, is banned. So blue clothes can only be exchanged, no money can change hands. And I envisioned that hubs would spring up in this world devoted to the exchange and mending of the blue clothes, and the hubs would be set up as a commons. That is not a free-for-all, that's not what a commons is. It's a system governed by rules designed to ensure its sustainment over time. So this was a few years ago, but my interest in commons continues in the current work that I'll come to later. So moving on to the second project that I've selected to share with you, that illustrates this tendency to borrow ideas from unfamiliar spheres, is my project that is drawn on fantasy literature, of course, for sustainability transitions. And this is the Fashion Fictions project, which I founded in 2020 and has since grown into this international participatory initiative that has engaged thousands of people around the world in scores of activities, and informed my latest book that was published in December and is available open access. So Fashion Fictions invites people to imagine, explore and enact enticing alternative fashion worlds as an unconventional route to real world change. It's driven by the idea that we're not going to create fashion systems that are sustainable, according to my understanding of sustainability, by tweaking at the edges of the mainstream system. So we really need to take time to imagine how we might want things to be. So this is based on the idea, to borrow the words of futurist Alex Steffen, that we can't build what we can't imagine. We can't build what we can't imagine. And I might add, we can't build if we can't imagine. So I'm exploring how I can use my design practice to help people exercise the muscle of imagine as the kind of groundwork for change. So the approach that I take to speculation, used in Fashion Fictions, is deeply influenced by my favourite author, Diana Wynne Jones, whose books I discovered as a child. Here I am reading one, and it's one of my favourite ones. I'm so amazed that this photograph exists, and that I managed to find it in the loft. So Diana Wynne Jones, to those who are not familiar with her work, is an acclaimed author of fantasy books for children. There are a lot of them. This is our Diana Wynne Jones shelf. That's not even all of them. My older son Caspian and I have been reading through them for the past few years. We think like at least 3 years, right? Yes. And I've just started with my younger son Asa. We're reading the one that is in the picture of me reading it in bed. We're at the beginning. But the book that particularly informed Fashion Fictions is this masterpiece, in which there are multiple parallel worlds which split off from one another at critical points in history. And so in fashion fictions, the speculation is conceived as an endless array of parallel worlds, rather than science fiction inflected futures, for example, which might be the direction that somebody who read different things when they were a child or a teenager might have gone. And I love this quote about Diana's approach to writing and her thirst for kind of endless options, which I can certainly relate to. And as a moment of pure indulgence, I've got you here, I've got the clicker. I wanted to share this image. I recently visited Diana's archive in Newcastle and had the privilege of hanging out with some of her manuscripts, including this one for another book in the same series. So again, in this case, the bringing of ideas from a different sphere was really instinctive. That's what also happened with the Commons link. I made the conscious choice to use speculation as a strategy, but the way I thought about speculation was very much instinctive, informed by these books. I think there's something interesting here about passions from your personal life, from your childhood, kind of bleeding into the way you see the world and therefore into your research. So, to tell you a little more about fashion fictions, I've already said that we're imagining enticing, positive parallel worlds in which people live with their clothes differently. We do this in activities structured in 3 stages, any of which can be activated at any time. So at stage 1, people write short written outlines of fictional fashion cultures and systems, like a 100-word description. At stage 2, somebody else, or often a group of people, will come along and pick up one of these stage 1 fictions. They will think themselves into that world and kind of make it their own. They can adapt it and change it as much as they want to. And then they're invited to imagine that they've stepped through a portal to the other world, and they've taken a photograph or picked something up and brought it back to show people what life is like there. So they're essentially making something that belongs in that world. And then at stage 3, we find ways to enact and experience the prototype worlds, find ways to really bring them to life, to do with our bodies what people do with their bodies in this world, so we can find a way of experiencing it. There are many, many examples of these imagined worlds in the Fashion Fictions book. These images give you a taste of the workshop process, the things that people make, the enactments that take place, and the diverse worlds that are imagined. And the project has an ethos of openness. Anyone, anywhere can contribute or run their own fashion fictions activity, which is how the project has been able to reach so many people. I haven't been to 6 continents and tried to get 7,000 people to do something directly. And all contributions are given a Creative Commons license that allows others to build on their contribution, as long as the original authors are credited, which leads to credits that look like this. Some of them get wonderfully long and complex. Good way to up the word count of your book by having like really, really lengthy credits for your images. And we've explored lots of different ways of sharing the worlds and the activities. The website is a mass of amazing content, kind of crowdsourced content. But some things that we've created for the things that we've run here include short films, showcasing some of the stage 3 enactments that I've run. So I'd like to share just a very short extract of one film that documented an enactment that brought to life a ritual garment exchange from World 27, every world has a number, in which textile histories are central to the way that garments are valued. So a participant in Mexico first created the stage 1 fiction for World 27. It was then picked up by a group of 3 participants in a stage 2 prototyping workshop, and I drew on their ideas to design this enactment that took place in a beautiful wooded quarry in Derbyshire.
There are a lot of stories in this garment, there are a lot of memories in this garment.
I wore it all over the place to parties and visiting and sightseeing.
It's been on loads of adventures with me, and it just represents protection and freedom and adventure. And it is on a new stage of life. The earth that gave rise to the cotton farmers, the cotton pickers, the dyers, the weavers, the spinners.
It is just not quite right for what I need it for.
All of those things that happened before I even got it.
But then it came back.
So in the fashion fictions book, I had the opportunity to dig into questions and themes raised by the speculative methodology that I'd developed, drawing on literature in fields beyond my existing knowledge. So again, towering piles of book from the library, from departments well beyond my own. So for example, when I looked more into the idea of enactment, as represented here by this lovely photograph from an enactment created by students at University of the Andes in Colombia, I drew on performance theory, and particularly the work of Richard Schechner, who gave me ideas to work with about the subjunctive, liminal, transitional space of performance that helped me to make sense of what we've been doing in quite an instinctive way. And I was also able to dig into common themes that I spotted across multiple visions created in the project. It was really fascinating to see certain ideas, concerns, priorities cropping up again and again across very different fictional worlds, like explored in very different cultural contexts. And again, to draw on relevant literature from a range of different disciplines. So this image is from perhaps the most talked about fashion fictions world, affectionately known as mushroom world, in which mushrooms are hailed as spiritual guides. I say that so in such an offhand way now, like, of course, mushrooms are spiritual guides. It becomes normal when you're thinking yourself into the world. So participants in this enactment were invited to present themselves to the mushrooms once a week and to share their experiences via a WhatsApp group. And this generated really interesting comments and reflections on their relationship with nature. And there's a feature that I've noticed in quite a few different enactments, but was particularly notable in this one, the mixture of kind of silliness. There was lots of jokes about mushrooms and fungi and lots of puns and kind of this funny thing of going to the woods, but also some really kind of profound insights that came through. And I really love that mixture of the kind of the silly and the profound being there together. That could perhaps be another recurring pattern. So these led me to explore theoretical perspectives on nature, and as shown here, the idea that we're now in a post-nature era, that we can't and shouldn't try to separate ourselves from nature. It's a positive thing. On one hand, it challenges the dualism that underlies many problematic hierarchies, but as the quote points out, it undermines this concept of nature that has long provided great comfort. So it was these kind of ideas were really helpful to me to try to navigate and make sense of the ideas that were being raised by people's experiences. This image is from an exploration created by students at LaSalle College of the Arts in Singapore, who were one of the first institutions to run fashion fictions activities with their students very early on. So this group explored a world in which a 5-piece mandatory wardrobe is issued by the government. In practical terms, the students were imagining a bacteria textile dyeing service that would help you to personalise your regulation garments. But they were also asking themselves, how can you find your own identity within a uniform? So the ideas in their world and others led me to look at the tensions between individual freedom and collective action. These come up so much in many different fashion fictions worlds, and particularly collective action for sustainability, and explore really fascinating and important ideas about autonomy and solidarity. So in these examples, it's the ideas of the fashion fictions participants who have led me to different areas of literature, which I was then able to draw in and apply to the project and help me make sense of things. So at the end of each of the core chapters of the book, where I explored these various themes, I identified questions that arose from the discussion, each of which I feel could form the basis of a new inquiry in research or practice. So I'll just share a few of them to give you a taste. So chapter 3 is about the theme of stories and language, and led me to ask, what can we reconfigure to make new stories? How can we shuffle the familiar to create new possibilities? Chapter 4 is about nature and spirituality. Led me to ask, what systems, mindsets and institutions do we need to decompose? We see that as a kind of a force that we could try to really engage with. How can we break them down? And what new habitats could we create along the way? Chapter 5 is about place and togetherness, and has a whole section about ritual, which comes through very strongly in lots of different fashion fictions worlds. So I was asking, what rituals could we design to support post-growth fashion systems? How might these rituals transform us and reshape our real-world practices? So here I'm offering up questions that others might be able to transpose into their own context, and supporting others to do the borrowing that I really like to do. I've done the same with the fashion fictions methodology, so I'm not only creating materials that others can use to run their own activities, as I mentioned, but also sharing the underlying methodology and collaborating to apply it to spheres other than fashion, so to the food system, to the built environment, to particular places, to organisations. It doesn't need to be fashion. You can kind of plug any area of life in and use the same playful approach. I missed one. Let's go back. The last of the core chapters was organisation and adaptation. So it led me to be asking what know-how should we nurture to be able to adapt not only our clothes but also our lifestyles and our fashion systems to changing conditions. So now I'm going to more quickly talk through two current projects that have developed from fashion fictions. The first involves me applying the idea of speculation to the process of transition. And this theme of transition arises naturally from fashion fictions, where we're imagining enticing worlds. So we're kind of imagining that the utopian system in a larger-than-life way, with the aim of exercising the muscle of imagination. So these kind of larger-than-life visions aren't intended to be made real, but elements of them could certainly be appealing for the real world and could inform strategies that we might want to put in place. So there's always a kind of implicit question of, okay, that's the vision, but how do we get there? I find myself being rather resistant to the idea that we can chart this kind of straightforward path from one place to another, and much more drawn to the idea that, like the approach to the use of magic in the Dinah Wynne Jones book that I showed earlier, that we might need to approach change in a sideways way, with a bend and a ripple. So for me, that could involve designing experiences that help people to explore what it might feel like to be part of a radical transition towards a sustainable system. My hunch is that if we try to discuss this in the real world, people panic. They realise that changes could involve major differences to their own lifestyles, and this shuts down discussion. So the sideways approach that I'm playing with involves exploring a fictional period of transition in a fictional past, and specifically a version of the UK in the early 90s, in which a government is elected that's prepared to take radical action for sustainability. So here's an official leaflet issued by the Department for the Environment in June 1992, explaining a new policy of clothes rationing. So I worked with my colleagues, Sally Cook and Vanessa Brown, to build this vision, and I have to say we had a great deal of fun creating some fake archival documents from a fictional past. I think we found ourselves saying, this is the most fun I've had at work for quite a long time. So yes, here is a new Textile Excess Minimisation Act, unfortunately known as the Fashion Police Act. Things get a bad name, and yeah, you can see the new system here. I won't go into lots of detail because I've just done it this afternoon. This afternoon we ran a workshop in which a group of participants, some of whom are here tonight, thank you so much, stepped into this world together, supported by more archival documents. We didn't just make that one thing. Oh, no. We made a whole array of items, fake archival items from this period, including an EastEnders script that Vanessa wrote, a letter to the Guardian that Sally had great fun putting together, and more. So we use these materials to step into the world together in a workshop that was co-facilitated by a participatory theatre practitioner who has experience of facilitating the legislative theatre process. This is a theatre of the oppressed technique. I won't go into detail here, but essentially we're drawing on a particular theatre tradition used in a particular context and adapting it, learning from it, bringing it into the context of the thing that I'm trying to do as another example of this transposing tendency. So the final example that I'd like to share is another current project in which I'm exploring the connections between design and organisation, again in the context of speculation for sustainable systems. So my interest in organisation first developed in my analysis of the fashion fiction's visions and my search for common themes across the visions that I've already described. So in the worlds, I found a really wonderful array of ideas about how the fashion system might be organised. So maybe there was shared community wardrobes, one in each location. Maybe there are subsidised clothing factories that are accessible to local people. Maybe nobody can own clothing. It all belongs to the community. Maybe consumers must spend time working in agricultural fibre production. I really like that one. I like all of them, but I do. That one always makes me go, "Ooh, yes, I have to go and work the fields." That might change how you feel about stuff. And then another one where there's a collaborative relationship between consumers and local domestic companies on the design needs of garments and textiles to reduce waste materials and inventory. This person was really thinking about how this thing was going to work. So here we can see diverse high-level visions that people have generated wonderfully. But what I've found in facilitating workshops and looking at the visions that people send in is that I think people, and me, I include myself in that, find it really hard to see how these things could work differently when we're thinking in a bit more detail. And particularly how these things could work outside the growth-based capitalist businesses that dominate the mainstream fashion system. So I'm developing a new project, Organising Differently, that's funded by the Philip Leverhulme Prize. My aim is to support the flourishing of post-growth systems for fashion and other areas of material culture by speculating on alternative possibilities for organising and really thinking about the whole system. So thinking about how that material system could be organised, how its people, resources and material flows could be configured in ways that differ from the current norm, with the aim of envisioning a system entirely guided by care and socio-ecological well-being. So in doing this, I'm drawing on organisation studies, a discipline located in business schools, including our own, and particularly work on alternative organising. But I'm bringing my design skills, my design orientation, my comfort with working in a generative mode, which I have found isn't such comfortable territory for social scientists whose expertise is in studying what already is. So I'm really interested in looking at what happens if organisation borrows from design and vice versa, recognising the links between the deeply human practices of organising and designing. So in practical terms, I'm designing a participatory workshop that will invite participants to organise a system of provision from the ground up, starting with a material flow linked to a locally abundant material or a widely used durable product. I'm showing this in a really abstract way because this is work in progress, but the idea is that we'll then add layers of detail on top of that material flow to envisage how, for example, human effort and benefit are configured, what methods of exchange are involved, with no prior assumptions allowed. Everything has to be kind of imagined from the bottom up. And thinking about what policies and cultures would need to be in place in the wider economy, wider society to make this kind of speculative flow possible. So at each layer, there'll be opportunity to draw on existing organisational formats, whether long-established formats such as a workers' cooperative, or the ideas about commons that, as I mentioned earlier, I've been playing with since my PhD. But I'm really keen to draw from documented examples of alternatives from different periods in history, different cultural settings, but combining them, kind of disaggregating the elements of those examples in order to combine them in new ways to create unfamiliar configurations and demonstrate endless possibility. So in research terms, I'm interested in how to design a speculative workshop that can present organising as a space for play and experimentation and show capitalism as just one among many possible systems. I'm also really interested in how this workshop is experienced and very interested in the visions that will be generated. So my aim is to share these visions via more fake materials, because it's really fun to make them, like those from the clothes rationing world mentioned earlier, and these other examples from fashion fictions. The thing about these materials is that they seem to really help the world to feel tangible and real. So the kind of imagined system, you kind of feel like you've got a handle on it. And these fictional organisations, supported by the fake documents that I want to make, could be used in education as alternatives to live briefs and inspire action in the real world. So my hope is that they'll help to spread the notion that things can be organised in very different ways. And they themselves, these ideas, might then be drawn into new spheres and used as malleable material for other people's initiatives. So to close, I'd like to return to the definitions that I shared initially, and just return to this definition of sustainability as the most important motivation and context for all this work. I do feel that there are benefits in these patterns that I've instinctively developed, and I'm sure that they'll continue to show up in the work that I do in the years to come. None of this could have been achieved alone, and I have many people to thank. Far too many to try to name everyone, and I would be doomed to fail if I attempted to do that. So I'll thank people in categories. I'd like to thank my family. I'd like to thank my colleagues in the school and the wider university, my collaborators, and all of the participants who have taken part and come along to play in the often slightly odd things that I invite them to do. And I think that's the end. Thank you.